Please pray with me. God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. You are our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Some years back, my dog, Bela, and I took a month off and hiked a portion of the Appalachian Trail, that little trail that runs from Springer Mountain, Georgia, to Mount Katahdin, Maine. A few of you have heard me refer to our experience on the trail or various wilderness things before. This particular venture started with a desire to really have time by myself, with just my dog, in whose eyes I could never do any wrong. This was the goal. Friends expressed concern. What do you mean out there all by yourself for a month? I never worried once. That's exactly what I wanted. So we go to the trail, and the first couple nights we are blissfully alone, mostly because we were too slow at that point to catch up with the rest of the folks that were hiking. We got kind of left in the dust, and it was great. But then, of course, trail legs kick in, is what we say, and you just get faster. And I was covering more and more ground and passing through new wilderness areas along the trail, and when you pass through those, you're supposed to sign in a registry. It's for safety purposes, really. And also at each shelter, there are little journals, and you can write something and leave your name. And I started to see the most unusual names in the trail registers and in the journals. Names like Figaro, Tofu, Bedhead, Box of Fun, Goldenrod, Yard Sale, Mr. Beers. I started to pass more and more people or interact with them during the day, and they would introduce themselves to me as something like pancakes. And I would say, I'm Barbara. So soon I wanted to have my own trail name, of course, and I had great ideas for what my trail name could be. But I quickly learned you can't give yourself your own trail name. It's something that's dubbed onto you by the community. And it's really something that the community comes to consensus with as to what your name will be. It's really kind of an initiation into trail culture and life. Now on the trail, the things that we tend to identify ourselves with are not things that we lead with on the trail. We don't typically say, now, where are you from? Where did you go to school? What do you do? Are you married? Do you have kids? That's the litany of questions we ask most of the time. But instead, it's things like, have you heard? Is the spring working at the next shelter? When was your last mail drop? Do you have any iodine tablets? I have some moleskin. Now, as you walk along, some of the other things about life, of course, seep through, such as, it took me a while to learn that Mr. Beers actually had just retired as a brain surgeon from Sapporo, Japan, or that Yard Sale, the year prior, had watched his mother tragically die in a horrible accident. And since that time, he hadn't really been able to keep a job or keep a roof over his head because of the trauma, so he just went from yard sale to yard sale and collected some gear and just started walking. So on the trail, Mr. Beers and Yard Sale, who in any other convention, any other forum, might not be together. One would be considered homeless, the other certainly wealthy. But on the trail, they were walking buddies each and every day with one goal. Will we make it to Franconia Notch by the end of the week? How far is Katahdin today? In my own desire to be really reflective and prayerful and, grow in all of these ways on the trail, I couldn't help but be drawn into this community, which meant I had to accept their invitations to share meals and swap stories and even tell secrets now and then. And I came to love the freedom of not being identified with all the markers that made me kind of who I was out in the rest of the culture and the rest of the world. And I began to really wonder which one of these is real, which is the real life or the real world. And I still don't know. But I do know that this is one of the most powerful experiences, actually the most powerful experience of community I have ever had. Last week we talked about identity, and I promised you that today we would talk about community. So in talking about identity, we focused on remembering who we are as God's children, really accepting who God says that we are as our primary means of self-worth rather than anything else. We talked about being called to take up the right amount of space, not too little and not too much. And a lot of you connected with me over the week to talk about that more, and thank you. We can continue to talk about that. It's a really important concept. But how are we supposed to know how much space we're taking up if there aren't other people around? How are we supposed to know when we're kind of stepping over those boundaries? And when are we supposed to know that we're not taking up enough unless there's someone else there? So maybe we need each other in that way. Last week I also mentioned Paul Tillich and his thoughts on finding the courage to be as oneself. Tillich also goes on to say that it is only in the place of continuous encounter with other persons that the person remains a person. So, of course, that place of encounter is the community. Our passage today from 1 John would certainly agree that for the Christian, for those of us who have said yes to the spiritual life, community isn't an option. It's a command. And it's a discipline and certainly a gift. The word here, actually, and it was read correctly in our passage, is the Greek word is koinonia, which some of you may know, but it really is the word for fellowship, which is different than community. Fellowship has, well, a fellowness about it, a sense of being with each other about it. For the John community that this came out of, their idea of a fellowship was pretty covenantal. It was based on a covenant, and it had in it a sense of abiding in. And it's covenantal because there was a mutual promise that to the best of their ability, even if they didn't always agree, they sort of had a structure around them that would allow them to have some things like differences and hopefully work it out. And then they say, we share this with you, we share our message with you so that our joy may be complete. I love that phrase, so that our joy may be complete, because being in fellowship and real connection with each other is the source of our joy. So what is the message that they were saying? Well, it goes a little like this. God is light, and in God there is no darkness at all. And if we say we have fellowship with God, but we walk in darkness, then we're liars, and we don't do truth. I love that phrase, we don't do truth. This idea that truth is something that we can do or not do more than something that we say even. A couple of verses later it says, if we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. So sin here can be best understood, because sin is a loaded word in our culture. It means all sorts of things. But really, all it means here is missing the mark. Right? So if we say that we always hit the mark, we're liars. Of course, that's not true. So this message, of course, is framed in terms of lightness and darkness, as is pretty typical for the John community. But if you look at it carefully, it isn't saying that darkness is sin, but it's actually trying to act like we don't have sin that kind of is the sin. Trying to act like we don't have sin that keeps us walking around kind of blind. So it seems that a key piece of walking in light is getting really honest with ourselves and with our fellowship with each other. In recent years, there has been some well-deserved and needed critique over the use of dark and light language in the Bible and in many religious texts. The terms impact, no matter how much we try against it, the terms can kind of impact subconsciously the way that we see skin, darkness and light. And so it has problems. Essentially, it's been argued that the use of these terms can actually support the very racism that we say we are against. So it's important, I think, to get a sense of what is really meant here by dark and light, I don't actually think those words kind of convey the meaning anyway. I think what's being said here is that walking in the light is walking in an awake and conscious way, and that walking in the dark is kind of sleepwalking and remaining unconscious. So the call to conversion for the John community is certainly a call to wake up. And what I mean by that is to quit sleepwalking through life, to quit not dealing with the things you don't want to deal with, but to really bring in an awareness and awakeness to all parts of life. Easier said than done, of course. Preacher and writer Barbara Brown Taylor just recently wrote a book called Learning to Walk in the Dark that's addressing some of these very questions, and she explores the necessity of really embracing the dark in equal parts to the light. And she says that the word dark kind of means anything that scares me. It's true in many ways. We all know that God also calls us to those very places that scare us at least a handful of times in life, whether that's out there or maybe more daunting in here. Carl Jung certainly wrote about this ad nauseum, the importance of exploring and embracing our shadow, or our shadow will wreak havoc in our lives. Or as one of my therapist mentors, a woman by the name of Pia Melody, says, embrace your demons or they will bite you in the butt. So, walking in darkness or unconsciousness perhaps is a refusal to know, see, hear, and witness our shadow, the things we don't want to see and hear, whether that's individually or community. But if we walk in the light, if we make a practice of living in a way that is awake and conscious, that's really different. That's what we're called to do. But guess what? That doesn't happen all by ourselves. We can have those intentions like I did on my hike, but it doesn't happen all by ourselves. Certainly I learned much, much more about myself, and I learned how to pray in new and deeper and broader ways when I said yes to the community on the Appalachian Trail, much more than I would have all by myself. Even our desert fathers were required to come out of their holes, so to speak, and gather now and then, so that none of them would fall into the temptation of believing they could do all this on their own. And I would guess most of us have had the experience of knowing something in our own mind and heart, even writing it down, but there's something about when we say it to somebody, whether it's a friend or a professional or our spouse, there's something about simply the act of saying it out loud that gives us something else. We see something we didn't see before. We have new realizations. So this fall, we're talking about being disciples of Christ. What does it mean to follow in the way? And one of the greatest gifts of saying yes to this is that we have this continual opportunity to see things in ourselves we don't want to see, but to share them and to be loved anyway, and sometimes because of, and to be held accountable and to be helped to grow. And there's really something that comes with acceptance of actually being known that is particularly powerful. It's doing truth. It's getting real about the ways we've all missed the mark, learning from it, integrating it, and then using that as fuel for more authentic living. And this is covenant relationship at its best. This sounds good. Okay. But it doesn't just happen because we show up here on a Sunday morning. I mean, that's great. It's vital. It's a very important place to start. We have to actually get here. But it takes a little bit more than that. Our text also talks about the need for confession and forgiveness. And it strikes me that it doesn't say to God. It's really about the community, about confession and forgiveness within the community and with each other. We're called to actually help each other embrace our own shadows, to walk together into the darkness that we'd rather pretend wasn't there. Now, I can't talk about this degree of realness and confession and forgiveness without, of course, actually talking just a minute about forgiveness. Remember, like the John community, we are also in a covenant with each other. Our denomination, the United Church of Christ, is very big on covenant. Very big. We allow for a lot of difference within the denomination, with a larger structure holding us. We don't demand everyone conform. We don't always agree, and that's okay. We hurt each other, for sure, and sometimes we do it intentionally. But most of the time, we don't. We miss the mark with each other again and again, but we are bound together through our covenant, and that container gives us the safety to work it out, hopefully. But I want to say what forgiveness is not. Forgiveness is not sweeping something under the rug and acting like it didn't happen. Forgiveness is not avoidance. It's hard. It means you have to go to the place you don't want to go, and we have to do it with each other. Now, obviously, this could be, well, honestly, a month-long sermon series on forgiveness. There's much to say here. But what I want you to hear today is that the kind of fellowship that we're talking about, the kind of community we're called to become, involves all of this. It involves love, it involves confession, it involves forgiveness, it involves grace. And that is what we're called to, and we can grow into this truth together certainly much better. So this is all becoming real as a community. For our intention to be living as consciously and awake as possible. We're very, very, very attracted to things that feel real, things that feel genuine. That's why sort of the topic of vulnerability, a la Brené Brown and others, has been so big lately, if you know what I'm referring to, because we're dying for it. It's no secret that the numbers in our pews and in our churches are declining universally, that more and more churches are having to shut their doors. But I'm pretty hard-pressed to think that's because there's less spiritual hunger in the world, right? No, if anything, there's more. But I think sometimes maybe church feels a little bit more like a creed instead of a connection, a formality instead of friendship. And who has time for that, really? We are both. We are all of those things. But the friendship piece and the connection piece is clear, is mandatory. It is clear. So yes, we're all sisters and brothers in Christ. We're all God's children, which means we have to love each other. Yes, it's true. And so generally we love each other. But who really wants to be loved just generally? You know, that's great. It's a great place to start, but it's not enough. You probably want to be loved because of the gaps in your teeth or the limp you have when you walk. I want to be loved because I like to wear Converse with suits and red shoes sometimes with my robe. Sometimes we want to be loved very specifically, and maybe even more because of the ways that we're not perfect. Now, some of you here know this. Some of you have this in places in your life, and even here with each other, some of you have this. Some of you would really like to have it, and you don't know how. I hear that as well from a number of folks. I want places to have these kinds of conversation. This feels like where it should happen. I don't know how to do it. So I know a bunch of you want it, and I'm guessing that for some of you, this sounds crazy. That this sounds pretty bananas. But I think whether or not we know it, it's what we're all looking for. This kind of connection, this kind of realness. Earlier, our choirs graced us with singing Pharrell Williams' Happy. Certainly, the song Happy has caught on like wildfire. I love the song. My one issue with it is this: I think a better name is Joy. That our joy may be complete. It doesn't really have the same ring to it. But if you think about what made this song so popular and spread like wildfire, it's the fact that all sorts of communities got together in all sorts of situations, sometimes literally in the midst of war zones, and made videos dancing around to this song. Joy is different than happiness. Joy can cut through even the deepest sadness. It's deeper. So our joy may be complete. And so it is with us. Because we are a fellowship, yes? And I'm thinking we have our sights set on our own communal summits, right? We have our own Franconia Notch and our own Mount Katahdin, or whatever our summit is. I believe that you have something that I need for the journey. And I believe that I have something you need for the journey as well. Moleskin for iodine, extra socks for a little more water. And as we walk together in awakeness and realness, I believe we might just help each other discover our true names.